Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Hey, it's Drew. This is part 2 of my interview with Noah Brier, who is on the now on the advisory board of Percolate. What exactly is your connection with Percolate right now?
So I'm the co-founder. I am on the board of directors.
Okay.
And I remain a strategic advisor to the company. So, obviously, I know all the folks there. I'm a large shareholder in Percolate and want nothing but success. So I continue to try to do whatever I can, but I left Percolate in very good hands, and I'm pretty excited for the future.
Well, and one of the signs of an entrepreneur is the ability to actually leave their company because you set it up and got it going, and you brought in management that knows how to do it. Okay, we're going to shift gears. At the end of part 1, you mentioned Byron Sharp. Both of us are fans of Sharp, or we're Sharpians, I think you might say. What are some of the key takeaways that you took from how brands grow?
Sure, yeah. There's a long list. So, obviously the keyest takeaway, I think, of the whole book is the idea that everything is about market share, right? So the kind of key concept of double jeopardy is that the first in the category, the top market share brand, also gets bought the most frequently. And the reason for that is that they have physical and mental availability, right? So if you're top in market share, then you're probably the most places. And because most brands are bought by infrequent buyers, right? So, I buy a soda 10 times a year.
Right.
When I go to buy a soda, if I end up in Taco Bell, I buy a Pepsi, even if I like Coke, right? And so I end up splitting my purchases across basically in line with the market share. Right. So I buy Coke, the most Coke, and then second most Pepsi, and then you move on down the list. So, I think that idea that market share is really the critical driver was a sort of big eye-opener, and I've spent a bunch of time doing some research into the kind of where those ideas came from. Originally, Andrew Ehrenberg, and even before that. The second one is about positioning. So one of the more bombastic things that Byron Sharp says is that positioning doesn't matter. And I don't really, I had sort of some cognitive dissonance there. I spent my career doing strategy. I think positioning is important. But what I have interpreted that to mean is two things. One, he's saying that what many people do when they're building a strategy is that they position themselves out of markets instead of into markets. So they try to position themselves against the smallest possible customer. So they're like, I am selling to people like Drew, and when they're wearing a blue checkered shirt, rather than just people like Drew when they're wearing a shirt, right? And so instead of thinking about how do I be inclusive, they're thinking about how do I be exclusive. And obviously you need to draw a line there, and part of where that line is drawn is going to be based on the amount of media money that you have to actually reach those people. Right. But starting by thinking about how you are inclusive in your positioning and in your targeting, and thinking about how you move those people into buying your product. And then the second part, which is not in the book, but I think this is my building on it, is that while I think he's mostly right about that first positioning point, that you should position yourselves into markets.
Now, this is really true for mass brands more than, say, like a super premium brand, your Mercedes, right? You can't go super mass with a brand like that.
I still think, though, that the idea is not you go super mass. Right. The idea is that you start with what is the largest population of people who might buy my product, rather than what is the smallest population. I think his point is that we generally target way too narrowly, and we position ourselves out of markets instead of into them.
Well, and I think part of it was his research showed that it wasn't your heavy users that make a difference. It's your marginal users that make a difference. So therefore, the heavy users are going to buy the same amount of share from you every time, no matter what, which I think is problematic in a dynamic marketplace because brands are changing, the marketplaces are moving faster. So I just wonder if that's true as much right now, because a heavy user of Burger King, can Burger King really take those folks for granted?
I think they have to.
Okay.
I mean,
focus on the light user. And so what's interesting is if you look at like Burger King at one point in time, it was all about creating new products. It's all about in that market, you create new products to attract attention, create cognitive dissonance, something new about it. So you go, oh, I better. But those new products should have been for light users, not heavy users, right?
Well, and the first thing about that market is location, right? You know, so
convenience, right?
Like you're not going to stop. Burger King is a place for the most part people stop at to get a bite,
right?
And so you've got to be in places where people are going to stop, right? Like nobody's better at this than Starbucks.
Right.
The most important marketing vehicle Starbucks has is the fact that they're on every corner you walk by, but they're very, very purposeful, right? When you see a Starbucks store close, it's not uncommon to see it open across the street, right? It's they know which side of the street you walk on your way to work because that's when they're going to get you, right? They're not getting you on the way home, and so I just think that one of the things he does well in articulating is hey, let's make sure that we're thinking about the 70%, the 60%, the 80% things, right? Location,
right?
And even if you can't affect those with marketing, if you're not aware of those, then you're going to miss out.
So let's translate this to B2B for a second, because a lot of the examples are B2C. So when you were thinking about Percolate, you were starting the category of content management platforms. Did it really exist?
Yeah, I thought about this a lot with Percolate. So we were building the content marketing platform category there. But the challenge that you have when you're building a new category is that people don't know about it yet, right? They're not looking for it.
Right.
And the first desire, the first idea is to say, hey, this is what we are. We are targeting this sort of very small group of people who want content marketing platform, but nobody wants content marketing platforms yet, right? Or they didn't when we came up with the category 5 years ago. And so what my interpretation of Sharp for B2B purposes was to say, hey, there's actually these sort of peripheral categories like digital asset management, where actually many companies are looking for a content marketing platform. They just don't know yet.
Right.
So they're buying, they think they want a digital asset management platform because they are looking to manage their content and create better ways to work with content and get it to the right places. And that actually, if what you're doing is content and not sort of very specific photos, a content marketing platform is probably a much better option for you. But we don't want to lose those people. And so the idea is, how do we capture digital asset management buyers? And how do we funnel them into content marketing platform? We want to funnel out the people who actually want digital asset management because we don't want to sell them the wrong thing. But if you are only thinking about how you target content marketing platform buyers, you're going to miss out on this whole landscape of people.
So you had to make sure that in the content you were creating and the work that you were doing that, hey, this larger world of we exist in that world.
And we exist in this world, and there's 2 or 3 other categories. And so it's about sort of how do you create – you've got core content marketing platform. That's pretty easy. People show up at your website, right? But then there's a set of people who don't know to show up there, and you've got to be able to sort of take those – and there's only 2 or 3 categories. And, I always thought about it as kind of judo, right? Like you want to take their energy into that category, and you want to redirect it into yours. And, again, you're going to lose some of them because they actually want – to manage a bunch of photos. They've got a big photo library, and that's not what we did at Percolate, what we do at Percolate. But they do. But for the folks that do, you want to sort of move them in and let them know.
So this is a really interesting thing, and I want to just, before we wrap up this section of the conversation. So you're a content marketing platform, and then there's these other things that people are looking for. And until the category got bigger, until you actually had competition, right, that were talking about this thing, how did you decide where to put your dollars for a marketing standpoint? And how did you decide to how to spread the word?
We did some funny things. Some of them were more well known for than others. One of the places we spent our money was on taxi top advertising.
I remember that.
Which is not something that's so common for startups, but actually was sort of really powerful for us because it was a way to let people know that we were there and make people think we're bigger than we were.
Right.
I think what we did is we chose a couple key categories, right? So, digital asset management was one of them where we felt like there were enough buyers in that category. When I think about the sort of tactics of marketing at this level, I think a lot about search keywords, because I think that to me is the easiest sort of tactical connection in is where is the search traffic? What are people searching for? What are the keywords that they are going to be looking for? And never mind whether you're actually executing it from a keyword perspective, but it just, for my mind, it sort of always makes it easier. So, digital asset management is a real thing. You have people who are looking for digital asset management platforms. That's a category. And so that was one place where we put energy against capturing those people. There's a couple of searches, obviously one of them. There's other places, but you create messaging, right, where you talk about and you try to convert people who are in the market for digital asset management into these.
We know you're thinking about this. Here's a broader idea that may help you.
Right.
Interesting. And I think it's amazing that you did that Taxi Top advertising. One of the guests on the show was Janine Pelosi from Zoom, and they built that brand with outdoor. And their brand was a little bit broader in that anybody could use Zoom, but it's a B2B brand, and that's where the revenue is based. And they built it on outdoor. And in fact, I've talked to a couple of other folks, and outdoor really works. It's all right. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into, dare I say, content marketing best practices. God forbid there is such a thing. Stay with us. Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now let's get back to the show. Okay, we're back, and my guest is Noah Brier, and we have been talking about sort of strategic approaches to category, your content marketing platform. Let's talk about content marketing, where it is today, why it's so ineffective for so many brands. And let's just start there. And maybe, we could go through your tensions if you want. Is that a good place to start for talking about content in the world of...
Well, I'd love to ask you a question, which is, why do you think it's so ineffective for so many brands?
Well, I think, first of all, most of it's crap. It's re-Googled material that's not original. It's not based on any original research. They haven't done their homework. They haven't hired good writers. So I think the quality level is poor. And I think it's way too focused on the product versus the buyer and we talk about with Clayton Christian, jobs to be done. This is sort of the whole Brent Adamson world, is that we're way too focused on trying to talk about ourselves and not focused enough on helping them buy our product.
Yeah, that's a funny one though. So I spent a lot of last year talking to folks in marketing organizations. So in 2017, I wrote a little booklet called The Content Bottleneck, which was all about the sort of operational challenges marketing organizations have around content, and it was largely inspired by a book called The Goal, which is like a famous sort of business school book about factories and about bottlenecks.
It's a parable.
Yes,
right?
It's a parable.
You mentioned it to me. I started to listen to it, and I got lost in the first 5 minutes. I'm going to stay with it.
I didn't tell you to get the graphic novel.
Oh,
that's the secret.
Oh, I love it.
It took me 5 years to read it, and then finally Stuart, who is our chief product officer at Percolate, told me about the graphic novel, and I read it in one plain flight.
I love it. We'll link to that, and I'm going to order that right away.
You should definitely do that. But the goal is all about the theory of constraints, and so I put this thing together, and I basically said, hey, when we talk to customers, we hear about this content bottleneck that they have. They all have a content bottleneck. And the first time I presented it at our customer advisory board, I said that we hear about the bottleneck in sort of two key places. One of them is that people say we want more content. And one of them is people say we want better content, sort of describing the two things that you just said. And I had kind of all these customers, it was like a record scratch. Right. I had all these customers stop me and say, well, actually, we have this other one, which is not either of those two. We have an orchestration challenge, which is that we have so much content, we have so many people creating content, a lot of it's really good, it just never gets where it needs to get to.
Right.
And I was like, wow, that's fascinating. I kept talking to people. I kept hearing the same thing. They kept saying this orchestration thing. And as I dug in, as I really talked to people about it, I found that a big part of it in B2B marketing is a disconnect between the brand marketing organization and the product marketing organization. So I think a lot of what you're talking about is exactly this, which is that rather than getting themselves aligned and agreeing on sort of where we're going to fall in this sort of hierarchy of messaging, if you will, are we going to be more customer-focused, value-focused, product-focused, or more realistically, like how are we going to do all of those and effectively connect them? The product marketing team and the brand marketing team just go their own ways,
right,
and they make their own content.
Right.
And so the product marketing content, naturally, because product marketers spend a lot of time talking to customers, is very product focused. It's very technical focused. It's, you know, the thing brand marketers love to say about product marketing content is that it's feeds and speeds, right?
Right.
And the product marketers say, well, of course that's what it is. Like, we're out talking to customers, and this is what they ask us, and so we're making content for them. Mm-hmm. And the brand marketers, on the other hand, are like, well, we need to raise the message. We need to move more towards value. We need to tell bigger stories. We need to be able to communicate customer first. And I think the reality is that both sides are kind of right. You can't exist in either. You shouldn't have either one as your only type of content, right? And, you know, I think Brent Adamson at Gartner articulates this well as he talks about the sort of early, mid, and late stage content and the tasks that you need to accomplish. But, you know, when you get to late stage and you talk about late stage tasks, what are people coming back to your website? It's very product focused, right?
It's demos,
security. It's things that you just got to knock this off their list. I think the most important thing to remember about B2B marketing is that in most cases, especially when you're selling big, complicated, expensive products, your buyer is also a seller into their organization, right? So they're trying to manage this whole thing internally. They've got all these buying groups. They've got all these people. And so, you know, you need to deliver very, very product-focused, very, you know, in-the-weeds content for them so that you enable them to manage that whole thing. But you've also got to have the whole other side. And so I think what I found in these organizations, that their big challenge was that not that they were wrong in what they were producing necessarily, it's that they weren't actually talking to each other. The product marketing, the brand marketing organizations were.
They felt like they were almost from different companies.
They were effectively from different companies.
And so for the listeners, a couple of things. I've done 3 interviews with Brent, and so we'll link back to those in the show notes of this episode. And as I'm thinking about what you're talking about, I'm thinking about 2 different CMOs I interviewed recently. One, when I asked the question, what do you wish you knew? What do you know now that you wish? And he said that you can do both. You can do brand and you can do product. You can do brand and you can do demand generation. Those 2 aren't mutually exclusive. And it's interesting, as I was listening to another CMO who I'm going to be interviewing, I saw her speak, and she said you can't. And so it's funny that these controversies that and these are both high-powered, highly successful CMOs at complete opposite ends of whether or not you can, you know, drive brand and drive demand, drive brand and drive, you know, which is, you know, I would argue that drive demand and product often sort of get blended. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we talked about strategically the issues with content to some extent, but I'm wondering, and some of the problems, I'm wondering, what are some of the solutions? Let's talk about your tensions, for example, revenue versus profit. Mm-hmm. Well, how does that impact content marketing?
Sure. Well, so I revenue versus profit, it comes from this booklet called The 5 Tensions, which we can also include in the show notes. I'll send you a link. But I was really trying to sort of pull apart this orchestration challenge. Uh-huh. And I was trying to understand why everybody is so focused on talking about customer experience. Because I think actually content marketing is a subset of the customer experience conversation.
Okay.
That's my interpretation of sort of where we're at.
Before you continue, I want to make sure I understand that. content marketing is part of the customer experience. Okay, so when I think about a customer experience, I think about I'm using the product. So this is customer experience before you purchase.
Prospect experience.
Prospect experience. Okay, that helps me. So prospect experience, content plays a role, of course, right? Because that's how I gain an understanding, a feeling. If I have a buying committee, it's how each of the members have sort of come to know the organization and the product and the promise.
And so what I was thinking about is why is it that everybody is so focused on this? And what is it about customer experience? And one of the things as I was digging through the research is that, sales and marketing. So sales, I think the number is, and this I think from Forrester is that 60% of sales leaders were asked to raise both revenue and profit in 2018, right? And generally, like, those are two sides. Like, you pull on one or you pull on the other.
Right.
And it's hard when you're asked to do both, right? But I think that's just the reality of the environment that we live in. I see it at big companies. I see it at small companies. When you talk about a lot of the big, especially on the CPG side, a lot of the big companies we saw there are all doing zero-based budgeting, right?
Yes.
And they're, it's a big trend. But so everybody's being asked to just do more with less, effectively. And when you think about how do you apply that to marketing, I think there's sort of two key pieces there. One is, I think, customer journeys, thinking about how do I target people, not just who might want to buy my product, but at the stage they want to buy it, is a way to make more effective marketing, which is sort of directed at revenue.
Okay.
And on the profit side, as you start to think about customer experience, you start to think holistically. And I think, again, we were talking in the last episode about Renegade and being sort of like multimodal by default. But I think, for a lot of these brands, they still think in their single channels, right? But as you start to look at marketing in a holistic way and you start to look at all the channels, and you start to realize that you've got a lot more levers you can pull. And actually, and this is something that Brent at Gartner says a lot, is that your website is a way more critical part than you might have believed before.
Right.
And the nice thing about your website is, while it certainly costs money to make content there, it doesn't cost money to put it there.
Right.
There's no media dollars attached to it. And so I think that the content conversation starts with, why are we producing content in the way we are? Why have things moved? Why are we so focused on one side on journeys and on the other side on being multi-channel, omni-channel, whatever you want to call it? And I think that really does come back to the pressures that exist now, which is sort of in their most basic, is about revenue versus profit and about trying to raise the bar on both of those things. The challenge there is that this is, of course, a totally new way of operating marketing, right?
Okay, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to sort of plow through best practices, if there is such a thing, for content marketing.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only, at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and we're going to wrap up this segment. We're just going to kill it. We're going to give more advice than anybody in 10 minutes could imagine in the world of content. Now, one of the things that's interesting to me, here you are, a content marketing, a content management platform, and you really realize, I think, that in order to sell this, you had to sell content. In order to sell content, you had to make sure that people were effective. In order to do that, you had to get back to strategy. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what you wrote about is strategy, because you had to solve the problem. We have to make content be effective in order to make it worthwhile to invest in our platform. Okay, so what do we need to do today, given all the content that's out there, to make our content programs more effective? Let's assume we have a good strategy.
Sure. So I'll try to boil it down to a couple reasonably actionable pieces of advice. One of them comes back to something we were talking about the last episode, which is about making strategy actionable. So I'm a big proponent of thinking about building content against journey stages. I don't think you need a lot of journey stages, but I do think you need to think in journeys. And those journeys need to be more than sales stages. They need to be the journey that someone buys on, not the journey that you sell on. Right. But the really critical question, I think, to ask against each of those journey stages, which too few people do, is what is the strategic intent of the content at this stage? Right? So if you've got early stage content, a lot of people say, what is the business objective we're trying to drive? The challenge with that is that the answer is always the same, leads or sales. Right. And if the answer is always the same, then something is not strategic.
Right. That's not strategic.
And so the real question is, what is the strategic intent of the content at this stage? And if you answer that well, then what you do is you arm people in your organization to create the right kind of content. So it comes back to the conversation we were having about brand versus product. There's times where the strategic intent is going to be much more brand focused. There's times where it's going to be much more product focused. But being right about those things and being clear about them is the most critical part to me. And so that's all about translating strategy to action. And I think that question of what is the strategic intent of the content at this stage, you line it up with each stage. That's a very simple question, I think, that people can ask themselves and include in their marketing strategies that will help everyone in the organization do better marketing.
Okay. Is there somebody out there that's using your platform that you think is killing it with content, doing a great job that we could link to in the show notes? Some brand that just has amazing content?
Yeah, I think that Cisco does a really good job. Lando Lakes is a customer of Percolate who's been a customer for a while and is a really fascinating company. They're a B2B company. Most people don't know that. Right. Everybody knows the Butter brand, but actually the majority of their business is in B2B farm products.
Oh, interesting.
And they, for most of us not in the market for B2B farm products, we wouldn't get there. But if you look at the things they're doing and the way they're approaching marketing, I think there's a ton of interesting pieces there to explore.
Yeah, I've looked at Cisco. I will check out Land O'Lakes. We will link to both of those in the show notes. Okay, so putting strategic intent at every stage. There's a lot of controversy, or I shouldn't, discussion about how long, like video is really important, right? How long videos should be. And what's funny to me is they should be, if you focus on the story and making sure that it's good, length doesn't matter. Are you in agreement with that?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. 6 seconds, 15 seconds, 15 minutes.
I think the only other variable there is the channel. Right, there are places where people are more likely to watch long videos, and there are places where people are more likely to watch short videos. And don't put the long videos in the short video place, and don't put the short videos in the long video place. Right.
But if someone is really into it and doing research and they're buying $1 million software product, they're going to spend the time and watch the video, assuming it's not boring, right, that you haven't lost their attention. Okay, so length doesn't matter. A couple of other things in terms of just off the top of your head of mistakes that you think people are making in content typically.
Yeah. I think another one that's just pretty simple, and this is, again, I took this out of some of the Gartner work, is to think about tasks, right? And so think about buying tasks. So, one of the things I said is make sure your journeys are buying journeys, not selling journeys, right? And, another thing I said earlier, which I think is really critical, is make sure you always remember that your buyers, especially in complex sales, are also sellers, and you've got to arm them. And so you've got to think about the tasks at each stage. So there are early stage tasks, which are really discovery tasks. There are definitional tasks. There are late stage tasks, which are much more about the technical details, the buying committees, the arming them with the things they need. And just making sure, you don't have to have content for every task, you probably won't be able to do that, but making sure that you understand the key tasks that your buyers take on, and you are creating content for those key tasks, and you make it accessible, right? And so just, doing a quick assessment and understanding where you have gaps and what's accessible and what's not accessible to them easily, and in what way. I think that there's a...
Accessible, when I hear that, I say gated, not gated?
Yeah, gated, not gated, yeah.
So are we gating anything anymore?
I think that the question, you should start ungated and default to ungated. would be
Default.
what I would say. Right. And so I think that historically what we've done is we've defaulted to gated.
Right.
And that is, it makes sense, like we're in a lead generation business, whatever. I think that if you default on gated and you ask yourself, should I gate this, right? It's a better thing than defaulting to gated. You might gate most of it, but at least you ask yourself the right question.
Right. See, and my opinion on that is simply if it is worth paying for, it is worth gating. But if it isn't worth paying for, it's probably not worth gating.
Yeah.
And that's a simple way of looking at it. Okay. What else? What other issues are out there on content that we can solve today? Wave a magic wand and help these folks do better content.
Well, one of them I said is just make sure your product marketing people and your brand marketing people are talking to each other.
Shouldn't they be together?
Yeah,
with one insight driving all of it?
Ideally, they have one insight driving all of it, but certainly they are in agreement for how these things work together. Because otherwise they're just going to go off in their own directions, and there's going to be this real. I've seen the tension firsthand. I've seen it in organizations. I've even seen it in Percolate at times. It's hard, right? They have different objectives. They talk to very different people, but making sure that they are aligned is really, really. It's just super critical. I know you agree with this one, but even though it sounds like a lot of the stuff I'm saying is complex, don't overcomplicate things. I think that, I have a chart that came from Gartner actually in my booklet that is this crazy customer journey. And I think there's a desire to make the perfect customer journey, and you can't.
Right.
Like because the perfect customer journey, there's a famous quote, the map is not the territory, right? There's a great Borges short story about a map that's the same size as the town it was mapping. By definition, you're going to simplify things, and you just have to agree on where your simplifications are and be smart about those. Those are some of the big ones.
Right. Well, a couple of notes. I say this a lot. Simple is hard. It takes discipline. It's just like strategy. It's being able to say no to. One of the things I thought was really interesting about the Gartner research was that if you design, and this is where I think persona-based things become problematic, is you say, all right, well, the CFO thinks this way, and so we should give him this kind of information, and the security guy thinks this way. And if there's no common thread, so when they're coming together as a committee, they're looking at 5 different companies, you're going to fail.
Yep.
You lose. Actually decrease the likelihood if they come at it and say, oh, I like them because they're cheaper. Oh, I like them because they have this. They won't agree. They have to come back to the same rationale for why, the same insights. So this gets back to the fundamentals of marketing. Stand for something and repeat it over and over again, over and over again through all your communication channels. And that's pretty simple.
Yep.
And that hasn't changed, and I think that's what Sharp is bringing full circle. That's what Sharp was really talking about, too.
100%, yeah. No, the only thing I'd add to that is make sure that there's always a connection back to the brand, right? And I think that this is more of a B2C challenge than a B2B challenge, but I think there's times when brands produce marketing in an effort to sort of be a part of the cultural zeitgeist, where they end up producing marketing on behalf of someone else. I think that, if you watch commercials for a lot of phones right now, and you turn the sound off and you cut the end logo, would you know that's not an Apple ad? Right? Everybody is trying to make ads look like Apple, and in doing so, they're making ads for Apple.
Yes, exactly.
And so, I think the to your point of stand for something, repeat it, I just say, don't be afraid of connecting it back to your company. Your logo always has to be there, and don't outsmart yourself on that one. There's that's a marketing rule for a reason. There's a joke about making the logo bigger for a good reason, right? Because logos
matter. It's funny, in an earlier episode I did with Ben Stewart at Bank of the West, as part of the process for developing the strategy, they put a bunch of banking commercials together, turned the sound off, and said, name the brand. And they couldn't. Yep. Nobody in the room, this was the board of directors, could not name the brand. Okay, so let's look ahead. Can we talk about what you're thinking about in the future?
Sure. It's day 2.
Okay, well.
So I can certainly talk about it. So I have started a new company with James, my co-founder from Percolate.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Here we go again.
Here we go again. It's called Variance. It's inspired by some thinking I've done around an idea called the variance spectrum. And the variance spectrum is a way to think about how processes work in an organization. The new company is really focused on helping companies, especially marketers, get more out of their software. It's very early days.
Right, okay.
Very, very early days.
Okay, will you be writing the code?
I will not be writing the code this time, thankfully for everyone. But yeah, we're getting back on the horse. I have a ton of meetings this week, talking to a lot of marketing ops folks and sales ops folks. Right. And if there's anyone listening to this that wants to be part of some research, please get in touch. And we have a pretty good sense of where we're going and what we're building, and we experienced a lot of different challenges about the role software plays in organizations, especially marketing organizations, that we think we can help solve. And so that's what we're going to be running after. But it's still early days. Right. I don't mean to be vague.
I suspect so. One of the things, I'm working on a book, second book, The Ridiculously Simple Playbook for B2B Innovators. And one of the challenges that businesses face right now is they have a marketing tech stack and it's like a tech on a tech on a tech.
Yep.
And very few of them will say with a straight face, and when I ask them, so is all that working added together? And the answer is generally no. But they have people who are dedicated to trying to do it. And it's like patches and things to connect and make it all work together.
And I think that what we've been seeing inside these companies is that the role of IT has been kind of splitting off, right? So IT is really focused first and foremost on security nowadays, right? That's the thing that takes up the most of their time. And then, about sort of they're focused on these horizontal services. And so, a lot of the application layer has been moved out to marketing ops and sales ops. And you have kind of owners of software building stacks for the first time that have never really done that before. And to your point, they've cobbled them together. They've sometimes got some sort of wire and bubble gum holding the things, holding everything together, and how you help them get more value out of those systems. Because, the reality is that we're increasingly living in a world. I mean, Mark Andreessen said a while ago now that software is eating the world, right? And, companies are seeing real value out of these systems. The reason they're investing the money they do in Percolate or Marketo or any of these other systems is because they see significant value out of them. But, helping them sort of work through how you continue to do that, how do you continue to add to those systems and adopt new ones, adopt new functionality within them. So we've got we think, a pretty clever idea of how to do that. But, day 2, I'm not quite ready to reveal the whole thing yet.
All right. Well, we'll have you back when you're ready to launch. Okay. So in summary, when you think about your content programs, content, in my mind, and I think it's part of your larger strategy. It's not its own thing. It's part of the broader, we can call it the prospect experience, but we can also call it the customer experience, because content has a role after purchase, a significant role after purchase. So it starts with strategy and clarity. And then from there, it's really sort of dissecting this prospect journey and sort of aligning with it. All right. Noah, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, that was great.
It was really fun. And until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.